writers that I included in this book. Because when I was writing it, I never dreamed I'd be living most of my life in Kentucky.
Really?
Yeah.
What distinguishes Southern humor from other humor?
It's the culture. What distinguishes the culture? That's the question. Southerners love to tell stories.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, and most of them are based in fact, but Southern people have good imaginations. You know,
Oh, yeah?
if you don't like Kentucky writers that I included in this book, because when I was writing it, I never dreamed I'd be living most of my life in Kentucky.
Really?
Yeah.
What distinguishes Southern humor from other humor?
It's the culture. What distinguishes the culture? That's the question. Southerners love to tell stories.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, and most of them are based in fact, but Southern people have good imaginations. You know,
Oh, yeah?
if you don't like what actually happened, you just kind of life or something that's happened to somebody else. And somebody who knows me is listening and tries to correct me. You know, I say, whose story is this, yours or mine? You know, if I say there were 26 rattlesnakes attacking me in the field, and you say, oh wait, there was only 12. You know, I said, now listen, 26 makes a better story than 12. So that's my story.
You could be a political speechwriter.
I could be.
Sounds
Yeah.
like.
I mean, I've never written for politicians, but that is kind of what they do sometimes.
Are there any stories that pop into mind out of this particular book right here?
Well, I didn't do a collection of stories. I did a scholarly study, you know, and as several reviewers noted when the book came out, there's a lot of difference between humor and a book about humor. You know, you're not going to laugh too much when you read this book because it's a serious study of humor. And humor is, of course, it's very basic to who we are as human beings. If we didn't have a sense of humor, we'd all go berserk in less than 2 weeks. So the fact that we can laugh at things. And the South was undergoing a very difficult period in its history.
Yeah, I think the Civil War doesn't sound too humorous.
No, but there's a lot of humor in the incidents that happen. You know, at a distance, a lot of things are funny. You know, things that happen at funerals, for example. Sometimes they're rather bizarre incidents that happen at funerals. Now, you're not going to laugh at a funeral. I mean, I hope not, at least not out loud. But a year or two later, when you're telling about it, it's going to be very funny. You know? So the Civil War was not funny in itself, but a lot of funny incidents happened, and they are recorded in history, and especially in the memoirs of the soldiers who. I
can't think of anything funny from the Civil War.
Well, I was not in the Civil War, but not quite. But when I was in for 2 years during peacetime, I found it a hilarious experience. I mean, there were things that happened all the time that were funny. Somebody would mess up, you know, make a mistake when you're marching or trying to clean up the barracks or something, and you don't laugh, of course, when you're in formation. But
so you're a regular foot soldier.
I was a foot soldier.
You weren't working as a press corps.
No. I was actually once I got to Germany, I had a desk job, but I was. Everybody goes through basic training, you know. Since I was a farm boy, I didn't have any trouble with all the physical activity. It was the city boys that passed out in basic training from the heat at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, where we were trained for basic.
So you didn't pass out?
I didn't pass out at one time. No, I could have walked 20 more miles and not bothered. It didn't bother me at all.
I'm just curious, what was your next publication after?
Well, when I came to Kentucky, I got interested in Kentucky history. I was always interested in Kentucky, you know. It's one of the most romantic states in the Union.
Oh, really?
It has a mystique, a mythology about it. You know, the first Western state, that's its claim to one of its claims to fame, you know.
Really?
It's the first Western state, the first state beyond the Allegheny Mountains. And it really was the first state to define what it meant to be a frontier state. And everybody knows Daniel Boone, you know, and people like that. So it was very easy for me to get fascinated, even more fascinated by Kentucky history and Kentucky culture. And I remember doing a book on Jesse Stewart's humor. Jesse was a good friend of mine. I had met him when he came to the University of Florida to speak to the students. and never dreaming at the time that I would be moving to Kentucky and would get to know him really intimately. But I did this book on, it was a monograph. It was published by the Indiana Council of Teachers of English. And then I got more interested in people, people like Lyman Johnson. I did a book on Lyman Johnson, which I think I have a copy of somewhere here.
We have a whole pile of
Well, I have a whole pile over here.
Wade Hall.
Well, why don't we show this one first? Since it's, this is a book I did.
Hell-Bent for Music.
Yeah, this is a book I did on Pee Wee King, who, of course, was a famous country and Western musician, who was not from the South at all. He was from Milwaukee. And his real name was Frank Anthony Kaczynski.
Oh, really?
And he moved south to Louisville and became a Southern country musician.
I never knew that.
And co-composer of the Tennessee Waltz and Slowpoke and a lot of fabulous songs of the mainly of the 1950s. Now, this is a book I did on Wilson Wyatt, who was a good friend of mine. One of the great people of Kentucky history.
For those that don't know, tell us a little bit about Wilson.
Well, Mr. Wyatt was a lawyer, a native of Louisville, who became one of the leading
is that the
statesmen.
law firm
Wyatt, Tarrant, Combs?
He
was a founder of that. And he was one of the great Democratic politicians in American history. He knew all the Democratic presidents from Franklin Roosevelt through President Kennedy. And at one time, there was a possibility that he could have been elected president of the United States.
Really?
But that's another story we won't go into. It's in the book. It's a book I did with him shortly before he died. And it's an inspiring book. His roots were in rural Kentucky, in Hardin County and in Hart County. His mother and father were from the country and moved into this big city of Louisville early in the 20th century. And he was born here. And he was a good man. Maybe too good to be a politician.
Oh, really?
Too moral, too kind of like Jimmy Carter.
Oh, really? What would be an example of his morality?
Well, for example, at the '48 Democratic Convention, Mr. Truman had been, had become president when Franklin Roosevelt died during the war, and he was being nominated by the Democrats for the presidency. And when the time came to choose a running mate, he said, "I want Wilson Wyatt." Mr. Wyatt had been his housing facilitator right after the war and had done an excellent job. And because he'd been mayor of Louisville during the war and had done a lot of missions for FDR.
World War II.
And World War II, yeah.
Okay.
During World War II. And so Mr. Truman knew Mr. Wyatt very well, and he said, "I'd like Wilson Wyatt to be my running mate." Well, Mr. Wyatt and the Kentucky delegation had already committed to Alvin Barkley. And when they came to Mr. Wyatt and said, "Mr. Truman wants you for his running mate," he said, "I can't do it. I can't turn my back on my friend Alvin Barkley. He's an old man. This is his last hurrah. This is his last chance for national office." He'd been, senator, a Kentucky senator. But he said, I have to continue supporting him. But nobody expected Truman to win in '48. Thomas Dewey was the one who was going to win, everybody thought, the Republican candidate. But that didn't happen. If Mr. Wyatt had not been such a man of high principles and had become Harry Truman's running mate in '48, he would have been elected Vice President of the United States, which would have put him in a position to have been the presidential candidate of the Democrats for a number of years. And he might have been elected. He could easily have been elected, I think, in 1960 when Kennedy was the Democratic candidate. Nobody could have defeated Eisenhower in the two elections before that, but a Democrat could have and did in 1960. So anyway, that's one of the what-ifs of history. And one of the things that makes Mr. Wyatt so interesting.
It seems like some of your books are like icons of Kentucky history, if you will.
Well, I guess so. Here's a book I did on Abraham. It's a play, really, that I did for the Kentucky Humanities Council on Abraham Lincoln. It's Lincoln through the eyes of his law partner, William Herndon, who was also a Kentuckian. And this